Going to open the hearing on House Bill 701, relative to healthcare patients' right to try certain emergency healthcare treatment options. And with that, I'll call the prime sponsor and open the hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, honorable members of the committee. For the record, my name is Lisa Mazur, representing Hillsborough District 44, the towns of Goffstown and Ware. I'm here today to introduce HB701 relative to a healthcare patient's right to try certain emergency healthcare treatment options. Simply put, the goal of this bill is to make New Hampshire the best jurisdiction in the country for clinical trials and right to try for people with life-threatening illnesses. With the advent of gene therapy, the world is witnessing a rise in innovative treatments for life-threatening and rare diseases. New Hampshire has a unique opportunity in this area, not only to help countless people in need, but to pursue a rare economic opportunity. Boston's biotech hub, where a large share of this innovation is happening, is 40 minutes from New Hampshire. If we establish ourselves as the most friendly and pioneering jurisdiction in America for experimental treatments for people with terminal illnesses, we have a truly unique opportunity to easily draw innovation and business into the state. I'm going to highlight just 5 areas where this bill is different from our current right to try law. First, cutting-edge limitation on civil liability. Our current right to try law, RSA 121Z, already limits regulatory enforcement actions against providers who give experimental treatments to consenting terminally ill patients. This bill will go further, allowing terminally ill patients to consent to a strong limitation on civil liability that will help them access experimental treatments. This will make New Hampshire competitive with Montana, which is now the leading right to try jurisdiction in the country and is unique in its civil liability limitations. The committee will receive extensive written testimony from people who sought and were prepared to pay for right to try treatments for their own dying loved ones. The problem is that even in so-called right to try states, the threat of civil liability, more than regulatory enforcement, almost completely deters manufacturers and providers from actually selling or granting experimental treatments to dying patients. Second, remote pre-screening for treatment. This bill would make New Hampshire the first state to recognize a state law for providers physically present in New Hampshire to conduct a remote pre-screening for experimental treatment when a patient is dying. This would mitigate one of the largest logistical obstacles that dying patients around the country face in trying to access treatments, and could thereby attract significant business to New Hampshire from Boston and elsewhere. Although the bill says telehealth pre-screening, it's important to emphasize that a pre-screening interview is not the kind of healthcare we usually think when we hear the word telehealth. A pre-screening is simply an initial meeting to determine whether a patient can apply to receive treatment. Many dying patients who want to access experimental treatments spend the last months of their lives physically flying around the country, primarily just to be rejected in various in-person pre-screening appointments. We should do everything possible under state law to make sure that at least these initial pre-screening opportunities can happen in person. And then third, remote signing of consent forms. It's similar to the one just described. And then I won't go into that. Fourth, a construction provision. And I'm not going to go into these in too much depth because you can read the bill, I'm sure you have. This would make New Hampshire a jurisdiction that attracts and fosters clinical trials and the development of drugs, biologic, and devices intended to treat terminal illnesses. The law should always be interpreted consistently with this purpose. And lastly, the most important part of this bill, and the piece that holds it all together, is the right of a provider or patient to seek injunctive relief against a state regulatory or law enforcement authority that is obstructing their treatment. Under our current law, providers need to sit by, wait to see if a state licensing authority or agency will come after them, and then invoke our current law, 126Z, as an affirmative defense. But the reality is this does not provide any cautious healthcare provider with the incentive they need to provide treatment. Instead, New Hampshire can offer providers from Boston who come up and set up shop in New Hampshire a unique degree of predictability and stability. By leading the country in this area, New Hampshire can both save numerous lives, like Lucas Turo, a famous young muscular dystrophy patient who is undergoing successful gene therapy in Boston, and attract business innovation to New Hampshire. All right, on a personal note, after walking with my dad through his terminal illness with no potential life-saving options presented or available to him, I strongly support protecting the right of patients with terminal diagnoses to access potentially life-saving or life-extending treatments. And I have a friend in the room that's going through the same thing right now. So I urge this committee to stand with patients, their families, and the physicians who are trying to help extend their lives by ensuring that compassionate access to emergency treatments remain a protected right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.